I'd like to call this public hearing to order. Roll call, please.
Mr. Smurl? Mr. Schuster?
Present.
Dr. Rothchild?
Here.
Mr. McAndrew?
Present.
Mr. King?
Here. The purpose of this public hearing is to hear testimony and discuss the following. The capital budget. We have a sign-in sheet here. No one signed in that I'm aware of concerning the capital budget, public hearing on the capital budget. We did have the mayor come in with the business administrator approximately 2 weeks ago to discuss the capital budget. As I said, there were no speakers who signed in. Is there anyone that would like to be heard on the capital budget? Okay, if there's no further business, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
This public hearing is adjourned. Thank you. Speakers here at Caucus tonight. We have our fire chief, Judge, who's going to kind of give us a brief on the flooding which recently occurred and how the city has been working to address those issues. Chief Judge, the floor is yours.
Good evening, Council. So I'll just start by saying we're still progressing through some of the initial damage assessments. Most of them have been done. The public assistance projects, which basically impact our critical infrastructure, those have all been completed at this point as far as the engineering assessment, and they've been forwarded to the county to be put in what they call the damage assessment tool, which PEMA can then see and which will be forwarded to FEMA eventually. I did receive notice today that the county will be doing what they call a joint PDA. It's a joint public damage assessment, and that'll be beginning on Thursday. Teams from FEMA and PEMA and the county will be in and meeting with local municipal officials, myself, the city engineer, the DPW director, be several other people from the city visiting the different areas that were impacted by the flood and taking a look at the different rivers and streams that, dumped a lot of debris into our neighborhoods. So that's scheduled for Thursday at this point. We anticipate that that's going to be a full day. Hopefully we'll be able to get to all the sites in that full day and then move from there. As far as the individual assistance goes, the city did some outreach events to make sure that we were getting in touch with different residents and getting their information into a similar tool that PEMA uses to do individual assessments. Those were successful. We had a couple hundred people come through the city, and then they had, I'm sure you saw the coverage on it, but the county, along with PEMA and other agencies, had the MARC events, the multiple agency coordination centers, our resource centers up at Chinchilla's fire station up in South Abington Township. And the city had representatives from code enforcement, from the fire department, and also OECD, I believe, were there as well, to walk some neighbors through try and answer some of the questions. A lot of those questions we can't answer yet until FEMA and PEMA come in and do their damage assessments and walk those projects with us. But we were, I don't know what the right word is, but we were glad to see so many people engaged in that because those numbers are important. That's how FEMA and PEMA determine if PEMA determines if they're going to ask the federal government for assistance, individual assistance. I think we're going to meet the threshold for the public assistance projects. That's the hope. There's a $23 million threshold that the municipalities need to reach, and that all that information has been forwarded up to the county at this point. I think we estimated in the city it was close to $5 to $6 million. That was just our initial high-level damage assessments that we worked on with the engineers, and those are just on our projects. That's not individual homes. Code enforcement continues to do work as far as processing permits if it's practical to do so. We have to be very careful with which permits that they do put out based on how much damage was done on those homes. And the reason we have to do that is we have to follow our flood management ordinances, or we risk being put on probation or suspension from the National Flood Insurance Program. To date, from last numbers I have, from August 28th or 29th of 2020 or 23, just about a month ago, we had 305 policies enforced in the city. those policies, if we do not follow the NFIP as far as permitting goes, are in risk of getting assessed by the National Flood Insurance Program if we fail to follow those protocols and those guidelines that are set forth and ultimately adopted by ordinance, which that's the only way you can get flood insurance in the nation, if you adopt those policies and follow those guidelines regarding issuing permits. So we've had contractors out between NEIC and Barry Isaacs doing damage assessments on individual properties and doing outreach with those homeowners that had substantial damage to their property to see what type of threshold it is, because those will dictate how we will proceed forward with whether they're able to be issued permits or whether they're going to have to do substantial improvements to the home that might not be feasible to actually do it because of the cost. So that's where we're at. We're going very cautiously with that. In the last several years, a major flooding that occurred in Luzerne County, one of the townships, because they were issuing permits, was put on suspension by the NFIP. And it took them 5 years to unring that bell, and people down there were assessed. People that might not have been impacted by the flood, but had national insurance, national flood insurance through the program. So we're being very mindful of that, and we hope that the public damage assessment, that joint PDA that will be happening this week and possibly into next week, that we'll have additional information for the residents and to begin some of these long-term mitigation projects, essentially. We are actively doing, DPW is out there, and when contractors are out in our floodways, opening up those streams back up in case something does happen. We're also taking care of the Merrifield Avenue pump station. There was another issue there the other night. It went down probably sometime overnight, but by 7 o'clock, DPW was back on it, and we've channeled some additional resources into that area where we'll be able to monitor that going forward. I know the DPW director, we were in constant communication over the weekend with the mayor, the police chief, the DPW director to monitor the status of our different streams and tributaries that go through here. Yes? Sure.
May I ask you a quick question about the pump station? So it seemed to have failed the other day. I know everybody doesn't want to hear that word, it failed, but what's the problem with it? We never got an assessment back from the city engineers. We're supposed to take a look at it, but it appears that it didn't work the other night, and you said they got it up and running. So what seems to be the problem with it?
So the initial night of the flooding would be because the Lindy Creek went over. So Lindy Creek probably dumped several million gallons of runoff into that area, which since I've been here, the 21 years I've been here, I've never seen the Lindy Creek do that. That pump station's not designed for it because of where the electrical panels are located in there. When I got on scene there shortly after, probably, I lost track of time, but 9 or 9:30 that night, it was almost up to the roof line of that pump station. So the electrical would fail at that point. The pumps were not able to keep up. Once DPW flood control was able to get that water all the way down to a level where they can get in there and assess them, North End Electric removed those pumps. They baked them, they checked them, and then Urban Electric redid the whole electrical panel. It seems the other day that one of the belts failed on the pump. They were initially running. We've talked to some residents in the area. They were able to hear them. We think they probably shut off sometime overnight. And all the water that's coming down from Kaiser Creek, which normally floods that area, was starting to build up. And when the flood control people got in from DPW the next day, they began pumping them out again. And once they were able to get it down to a safe level where they can get in there, they looked at the other pump. One of the belts had to be changed. They changed that belt. So we're looking at long-term solutions, and I know the engineer is looking at that, but that's not something that we're going to be able to throw up overnight. So what they're doing is they're looking to make sure that that pump continues to run. So the city is looking to install 2 cameras. I believe IT might have been out there today, 2 cameras that will look at that pump station and that the police department will be able to monitor. And we're also looking at what they call a transducer, which will send a signal or a automated telephone call. We're still looking to see where that call is going to go. I believe either police headquarters or to the comm center to alert them that the pump has shut off or that it's turned on. So each time it turns on or shuts off, we could have PD or the fire department go over, look, see if water's starting to back up, and then make sure that we get it addressed beforehand. But we did have the contractors out there. They resurfaced those pumps the first time, and they've been back out there the second time. So we're looking at some alternative solutions to see if the pumps just need to be replaced while we're coming up with a longer range plan to be able to replace that pump station, which the engineer is looking at.
Thank you for answering that. I also had questions about that pump station. I did notice, because I'm in the area, that it didn't seem to be running the other night. So I did see the electricity was pulled off of that building after the major flood on the 9th. So they had electricians back out. The pump was up and running, but in the last 2 days, it was due to a belt that had failed.
Sunday night, that's what I was told by one of the DPW foremen when he had North End Electric out there. They replaced the belt on. There's a smaller pump there that kind of runs all the time as that pit fills up, and then I believe the bigger one kicks on when the water gets to a certain level. So we're looking to see how it can, there's a light and a buzzer that goes off there, and now that nobody's living over in that area, nobody can call. And I know DPW director was out there several times over the weekend. He was checking on that pump, and it had been working properly, but sometime overnight, Sunday into Monday, the pump failed and wasn't able to keep up with the water because both of them were not running.
And now I noticed you had the one pump over there that day to pump that out over to Dewey. Last year, you've used several pumps over there as well. Now, last year, was the pump station running? You were just trying to supplement the pumping out, or was this an issue that was occurring last year as well?
I don't have that answer on what happened or occurred there last year. I'd have to check with the DPW director. He might have some information on that. But they had 2 pumps out there yesterday to pump that down to level to be able to get Lee Electric into the building, or excuse me, North End Electric and Urban in there to be able to make sure that everything was good. There was no electrical damage this time. It was a belt issue. It didn't get up over the electrical panels, so no electrical service needed to be done, but they're looking at alternative ways that we can get automated signals, which that's not something earth-shattering to be able to do. I know that there's a lot of sewer stations throughout the Abingtons and stuff that do the same type of thing as far as signaling.
Chief, if I heard you correctly before, so far, the assessment has been around $5 million. That doesn't include any of the homes that are more than likely, some of them, I mean, the couple that I've seen are more than likely going to be condemned. Will they ultimately be included in that overall assessment?
That will be under a different grant program. That will be if individual assistance, the individual assistance grant is able to be implemented. And it's not a real easy answer on how they determine. It's the 3 counties are in this disaster area. It's Luzerne, Wyoming, and Lackawanna County. They have a matrix that they'll put that in. That's why it was important when we were going out there and talking to the residents and had that mark that we had people uploading pictures, giving us what damage they had there. Now PEMA and FEMA will look at that and they put it into a matrix and it'll tell them likely to be approved for IA, unlikely to be approved, somewhat likely, or somewhat unlikely, and then they'll make a decision whether or not to ask for that.
So it's a 3-county request?
It is. It'll be the region when they look at the threshold that needs to be met. And, you know, we've heard numbers, 860 some properties, but it depends on the damage as far as whether it'll be likely that we'll be able to get the individual assistance grant and assistance from the federal government. So that's what we're waiting for right now. I think we're going to have more answers after PEMA and FEMA, who will have boots on the ground this weekend. PEMA has already been here. But once FEMA comes in and sees, you know, the pictures, we've been collecting pictures through our project management team. They've been working with the engineers to make sure that we're capturing all the damage as far as cleanup. All the directors have been capturing all the costs as far as any personnel or equipment costs related to our response to that flood. And right now we're just in the phase of actually doing the debris removal. Once that debris removal is done, if we do get that grant, hopefully it will open up that we'd be able to apply for mitigation, so permanent improvements in some of those creeks and streams and rivers further upstream. And you know, our problem really here is in the city. We sit at the bottom of the bowl. Everything is flowing down to us. You know, so, you know, improper land management and planning above us is going to affect us. So what we might do right now to fix those solutions. If the other communities that are sending us that water through those rivers and tributaries don't do what they're supposed to do, those are going to eventually get overrun as well. So it's about having there's going to be some uncomfortable conversations that are going to be had.
Well, I think that's why we were looking at that regional stormwater authority. So
Couldn't
that-
agree with you more.
Yeah. I
Yep.
think, if there was ever evidence that all these other surrounding communities need to be involved, sadly, this, disaster had to show glaring evidence of what happens if we're not all in this together and we all are responsible for stormwater mitigation. So I appreciate that.
Yep.
So Chief Judge, it seemed like you had a pretty good grasp on, and you might not know everything when it comes to it, but the condemnation process. Just while you're here, could you tell a family whose home has been condemned, what should they do? What steps should they take?
So, some of the things that we've talked to them about at the different events that I've been to and what the code enforcement and OECD personnel have told them is, listen, we're still compiling that data, but in the interim, stop the damage right now. Like if you have sheetrock, we've told people, remove that sheetrock that's wet. Stop that mold infestation that might be gathering in there. Clean out the basement. Protect the property that wasn't affected. Make sure the home is secured. Call your insurance company. I know that most insurance companies don't cover it, and unfortunately, a lot of the people that are sitting in a floodway or in a flood zone, which our maps indicate that, over the years they dropped the flood insurance. And, I've talked to a couple residents about that. Now they have no flood insurance to be able to make those repairs or get any costs back. So the city's got to be very careful and very diligent, especially those homes that are in those flood zones, on what we permit them to be able to do, because it will affect other residences if we don't follow the guidelines as set forth. Because where we're at, we need that flood insurance program so that people are able to afford it. And that's getting tougher now because they've redone how they actually do the flood insurance. They have it's called Equity in Action, Risk Rating 2.0. But it raises rates significantly. Not if you already have it, but if you're buying a house that has one, your rates are going to be a lot more. National Flood Insurance Program pays out hundreds of millions more than it takes in. So it's a problem, and that's why they rely, and that's why the enforcement end from PEMA and FEMA, and they sent us a reminder, make sure you're doing these steps when it comes to those properties. They sent us reminders, and I know the mayor has reached out and she wants to set up a meeting with the city planner, with code enforcement, myself, and those FEMA officials, walk us through this process. But from the get-go, Tom Oleski and his crew, we've been making sure that we're very diligent about how we're going to go forward with that so that we're not affecting other homeowners who currently have flood insurance.
And those,
I'm sorry.
and those residents that are out of their homes at this point in time, any tips that you can give them on this permit process, or what they should be looking for, or
So the best thing they should do...
sit tight on certain permits while you can get these others?
Yeah, so what we're doing right now is, and here's the problem, if they're in that flood zone and they had, substantial damage to their property above 50%, that's under the flood insurance program. It's going to require them to put the electrical panel on the first floor, to put the boiler on the first floor, put certain openings in their house, maybe raise it 1 foot above what they call the BFE, the base flood elevation. It becomes cost prohibitive for them to do that. But the ones that are maybe slightly or moderately damaged, that are under the 50% total damage or the threshold, it's getting your contractors out there, getting the numbers together on what it's going to be, contacting code enforcement. I know that Tom Oleski, that's him and his staff, that's all they've been really dealing with the last 2 weeks, a week and a half since this flood has occurred, is making sure that the homes that we know aren't above a 50% damage value, if they're able to, we're issuing the permits, so long as they pull those permits the proper way. We have the cost estimates. We've used Barry Isaac to go out there and do assessments on it. Don King has been involved. There's been a lot of departments in the city that have been involved to make sure that we are navigating that in accordance with our legislation and the National Flood Insurance Program. So it's a tough conversation, Councilman Schuster, and we wish we had more answers right now, but I'm hopeful that in the coming weeks we're going to have more once we know which way we're going with the individual assistance. Because if the individual assistance doesn't open up, there are some other avenues They're not going to be like the full value of the house or damages, but there's small business loans that they could put in, but we can't ask for that SBA right now until we make a decision on whether or not we're going to pursue IA. So once the county and PEMA officials decide if we're going to pursue the individual assistance, then if they say, no, we don't have enough, we put it into the matrix, they will open up a small business, an SBA here for low-interest loans, and then the state also has a fund of money line item in their budget that's actually for those people that fall through the cracks if certain things don't happen. So we're hoping we're going to have a lot more information, but we're really waiting on state and federal government to give us more guidance. But, you know, we're in constant contact every day, and we're working this problem. We understand the pain that, you know, our residents that were affected by this flood are feeling. So the goal is to make sure that that doesn't happen again.
Do we know how many homes or how many residents are above that 50% damage threshold?
Code enforcement does, from the estimates from Barry Isaac, they do have some information on that. I don't have that in front of me right now, but yeah, from the estimates that came back from Barry Isaac and working with Don King on what the assessed value of the property is, I think they probably have a good hold at this point, because I think we've done a pretty good job of getting around to all the impacted areas in the city and making sure that we did our due diligence to make sure that we were capturing all that information.
So, Chief, I understand the sensitivity of the permits, and you explained that, you know, if we're not in compliance, that affects the national flood insurance, and it can affect everybody. So, I have a two-part question. So, first of all, mine's along the same lines as Councilman Schuster. People are reaching out to us, okay?
Yes.
They're like, hey, what can I do to bring my house back to being livable before we wait for, you know, the so-called buyout that might come down the road? So you said, you know, houses that are above 50% have been identified. Do the owners of them houses know that they've been identified? And if that's so, if they're above that 50%, then they're the ones that probably can't get permits, right? I need an example of a permit they shouldn't be able to get that could affect what you spoke of earlier with regards to, you know, an infraction with the National Flood Insurance Company. Like, I think the residents, the ones that are reaching out to us, they don't know these questions that Tom mentioned, and you're mentioning the 50%, and they're not aware of this. You know, and of course, it's a horrific situation they're in, but I just think they need more reassurance and more information, like you're giving us, I think has to get out to them.
I know that code enforcement, when they are reaching out to code enforcement, Tom Oleski and the staff are pushing that information out, and I know that I spoke to several residents in the city at some of the marks and some of the other events and conveyed the same information that I've conveyed to you tonight. But code enforcement is really where that permitting process starts. I know that we've gotten several homes back online, restored the power to them. They might have only had, you know, flood and debris as far as mud in the basement, and maybe had to have an electrical panel pulled while they were doing that clean out. And, you know, some homes have been put back online. There are some that have not, but I know that when I was up at the Mark and Chinchilla, the code enforcement and, the OEC folks that were up there were reaching back down here to the city if they had questions about their specific property and whether or not we had done a damage assessment and evaluation of the cost. And my advice would be for them to reach out to code enforcement, and they will be able to provide more guidance. But I know when they reach out, code enforcement and Tom Oleski and Andrew Sunday have that information, and they've been flushing that out.
Sorry. God bless. Because we got, you know, I can give you, for instance, we got an email that said, you know, we reached out to Mr. Oleski to get permits to bring our house back up, electrical first. And they were told no. But then a day later, they called and talked to someone else in the department that told them they can get them. So, you know, it's very confusing to these residents that are in this situation. So we need to be more consistent with the information, and because we're still getting emails and letters about it. So, just so you're
Would
aware.
it be possible for the administration, and maybe yourself and Tom Oleski and some of the people that are really working on this evaluation of the flooding and for these, especially for our residents who have been really affected? I mean, people basically lost their homes. Would it be possible to put together almost just like an information sheet, a bulleted sheet to say, step by step, here's the following things that you need to be mindful of. If you're trying to get back into your home, you need to go and apply for this permit, make sure that this is done, that is done. Just, so that like a step-by-step cheat sheet, I guess it would be, for people to access on our website, maybe. I don't know. I don't think it would take too much, but put all those heads together and say, hey, listen, they can direct them to it. Is that a possibility?
Yeah, I would think it is. I would defer that to Mr. Oleski, but I know that they did put together 2 fact sheets and bulletins and send those to most of the impacted residents if they had contact information with them. So I know,
If they have it already, Chief, then
Yeah.
maybe we can take that, post it, and then put an announcement on our website, say, listen, here's, questions, the answers to questions you may have concerning flooding.
Yeah.
Boom, and at least they immediately can direct. Just
yeah,
a thought.
I will reach out to Director Oleski and the mayor and the business administrator and pass that
And
on.
that may save Tom Oleski and some of the other departments from having to get a ton of calls all the time. If
Yep.
they, maybe all those questions can be answered and posted, and it would help relieve some of the anxiety. I mean,
Yeah.
a lot of people are struggling out there, so we appreciate everything that the Scranton Fire Department, DPW, Scranton Police, code enforcement, everyone has been doing to try to help our citizens through this incredibly difficult time.
Yeah, it's been a team effort across all departments in the city. Everybody has been involved, and there's been a lot of discussions back and forth. We're hopeful that we have more information to pass along to the residents, but we're kind of handcuffed at this point by PEMA and FEMA until they make their decision, but it's part of the process. I know it's not speedy and quick, but we're trying to get them as much information as we can, and we'll try and I'll talk to the mayor and the business administrator and Director Oleski about getting that up on the website.
Thank you, Chief.